Welcome to the Midnight Library, a place where the night feels calm, the world slows down, and stories become a gentle pathway to rest. Find a quiet spot, settle in, and let your body sink into stillness. Breathe deeply in and out, leaving the day behind. This is your time to rest, your time to dream, your time to drift. And now, let us begin tonight's story.
The journey began on an evening brushed with gold. The sun had lowered itself gently toward the horizon, and the world was wrapped in a calm, fading glow. At the small town station, the platform was hushed, as though everyone had agreed to speak softly so the evening would not be disturbed. Evelyn, though not the Evelyn of the bookshop, but another, a traveler of quiet spirit, stood with her suitcase at her side. The train tracks stretched ahead like silver ribbons disappearing into the hills, promising a path towards someplace slower, gentler. Vermont. The train was not hurried. Its carriages gleamed with the polish of time, lanterns glowing warmly in each window. It waited, patient as twilight, as if it, too, enjoyed the stillness of the hour. Evelyn breathed deeply, taking in the scent of wood smoke from chimneys nearby, mingled with the faint perfume of pine trees. The air was cool but kind, carrying with it the hush that comes only when day prepares to surrender to night. When the conductor stepped forward, tipping his cap with a smile, his voice was low and reassuring. "Tickets, please. Boarding for Vermont." The words felt less like an announcement and more like an invitation not just to travel, but to rest, to let go, to drift into the rhythm of the rails. Evelyn stepped onto the train, her hand brushing the polished brass handle. Inside, the carriage was warm, softly lit with golden lamps. Plush seats lined the windows, and beyond them the landscape shimmered, waiting to become a moving painting once the train began its gentle song. She placed her bag beside her seat, leaned back, and let her shoulders soften. Around her, other travelers settled in: an old man with a wool hat, a young woman carrying flowers wrapped in paper, a couple speaking quietly as they shared a thermos of tea. Everyone seemed touched by the same serenity, as though the train itself carried peace within its wheels. With a long, deep sigh, the train stirred. The whistle sang once, low and soft, and the carriages began to glide forward. The station fell behind. The journey began. The rhythm of the rails took hold. Click, clack, click, clack. A steady heartbeat. A lullaby. Outside the window, the last streaks of sunlight melted into dusk, and the world softened into shadow. Fields passed like whispers, rivers glimmered like silver threads, and the mountains ahead darkened to silhouettes beneath the first emerging stars. Evelyn let her eyes rest on the horizon, and for the first time in many weeks, she felt her breath deepen, her mind quiet. The train to Vermont was not just carrying her to a place on a map. It was carrying her into stillness, into calm, into dreams waiting just beyond the edge of night. The evening began in stillness. A stillness so gentle it felt as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to arrive. The small town station was tucked between rolling fields and the first shadows of the hills. Its wooden beams glowed faintly in the last light of day, and its clock, mounted high above the ticket booth, ticked in a steady rhythm, unhurried. The platform stretched quietly into the distance, its planks worn smooth from countless travelers who had come and gone over the years. Evelyn stood at the edge, her suitcase resting by her feet, and listened. There was no rush, no clamor. Only the faint rustle of leaves from the line of trees beyond the tracks, the occasional distant call of a bird settling for the night, and the soft sigh of her own breathing. The air was cool, touched with the scent of pine drifting down from the mountains, and tinged with wood smoke from nearby chimneys where lamps and fires were being lit. Each breath she drew seemed to cleanse her of the day that had passed, preparing her for the journey ahead. Then came the sound, distant at first, like a low hum beneath the horizon. The sound of the train. It grew steadily, not rushed, not loud, but strong and certain. The deep churning of the wheels on the rails, the steady heartbeat of an engine built to last. Evelyn lifted her eyes and saw it, a silhouette approaching from the curve of the track, lanterns glowing warmly in its windows, like golden eyes moving through the twilight. The train slowed as it reached the platform, exhaling great plumes of steam that curled upward into the fading light. The hiss and sigh of the engine seemed less mechanical than alive, as though the train itself was weary from a long day of travel, ready now to glide gently into the night. Evelyn felt a ripple of anticipation. Not a sharp excitement, but a soft one like the turning of a page. This was not a hurried journey. This was a passage meant to be savored. The conductor stepped onto the platform, lantern swinging in his hand. His uniform was neat, his cap tipped respectfully, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and calm. "Tickets, please. Boarding for Vermont." His words seemed to drift through the evening air like an invitation, not only to a destination, but to rest. To let go of the day and surrender to the rhythm of the rails. Evelyn picked up her suitcase. Its handle was cool in her palm, and the simple weight of it grounded her as she stepped forward. She handed the conductor her ticket, which he stamped with a click that echoed softly, then returned with a nod that said, "Safe travels." She climbed the steps and entered the train. Inside, the carriage glowed with golden lamplight, casting soft halos over the seats and windows. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of polished wood and old leather, with just a trace of coal smoke drifting in from the engine. Plush seats lined the walls, their cushions inviting, their brass fittings shining dimly in the light. The windows framed the world outside like paintings, one last view of the platform, the station, and the sky deepening into indigo. Evelyn set her suitcase beside her chosen seat and lowered herself onto the cushion. She leaned back slowly, feeling her body sink into the softness, her shoulders releasing tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Around her, other passengers settled in too, each moving quietly, as though the atmosphere of the train itself asked for gentleness. There was the old man with the woolen hat, who placed his walking stick carefully by his side before folding his hands in his lap. A young woman entered carrying a bundle of flowers wrapped in paper, their fragrance faint and sweet, filling the air with the scent of meadows. A couple sat nearby, sharing a thermos of tea, their voices a soft murmur, like a lullaby meant only for each other. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself simply listen, the low hum of the engine, the shuffle of footsteps, the sigh of the train settling into stillness before departure. Then came the whistle, a low, lingering note that seemed to stretch into the distance. The train shuddered softly beneath her, then moved with a long, smooth breath. The platform slipped away, the station lanterns receded, and the journey began. Outside the window, the world unfolded in slow motion. Fields stretched like wide blankets of shadow. A narrow river caught the last glimmer of daylight, shining like a thread of silver before vanishing into the trees. The mountains rose in the distance, their outlines softened by mist, their peaks disappearing into the first stars of night. The rhythm of the rails began. Click, clack, click, clack, steady and certain. A heartbeat to travel by, a lullaby for weary souls. Evelyn rested her head against the cushioned seat, watching the horizon blur as the train carried her deeper into the evening. She felt the calm of it seep into her bones, into her breath, into her very thoughts. The train to Vermont was not only taking her to a place, it was carrying her into stillness, into peace, into the gentle embrace of night. The train moved steadily into the night, its rhythm unhurried, its purpose sure. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound repeated like the slow beating of a heart, guiding every passenger into a calm that grew deeper with each passing mile. Outside the windows, the sky had surrendered fully to darkness. But it was not an empty darkness. It was rich, vast, and filled with stars. They glittered above the hills like lanterns hung in the heavens, quiet and eternal. Some shone sharp and bright, while others glowed faintly, their light softened by distance, yet no less steady. Evelyn leaned her cheek against the cool glass, gazing upward at the stars as the train glided along. The constellations seemed to travel with her, companions in the quiet night. Orion stood tall on the horizon, while the North Star gleamed with the quiet confidence of a guide, steady and unfailing. From time to time, the train passed through patches of forest. The trees, tall and ancient, stood close together, their trunks black against the silver moonlight. The branches arched above like vaulted ceilings, forming shadowed tunnels that the train whispered through. The rustle of leaves blended with the hum of the rails, creating a harmony of earth and motion, a lullaby written by nature itself. In one clearing, a small lake appeared, catching the reflection of the sky. For a moment, it looked as though the train was gliding across stars themselves, the mirrored constellations shimmering on the surface of the still water. Evelyn's breath caught softly, not in surprise but in awe. This was beauty that asked for no words, only silence, only presence. Inside the carriage, the lamplight glowed softly, casting golden halos over the passengers. Some had already drifted into sleep, their heads resting against the seats, their breathing slow and even. The old man with the walking stick had pulled his hat lower over his eyes, his hand still resting gently on his cane. The young woman with the flowers had set them carefully on her lap, her chin tilted downward as she slipped into dreams. The couple who had shared tea now sat in quiet stillness, their shoulders leaning together, as though the rhythm of the train itself had lulled them into a shared silence. The conductor walked slowly down the aisle, his lantern dimmed, his steps soft on the carpeted floor. He checked each carriage with the patience of someone who had traveled this route countless times. When his eyes met Evelyn's, he offered a small, knowing smile, as if to say, "Yes, this is a night meant for peace. You are exactly where you are meant to be." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment and let herself sink deeper into the sounds around her. The gentle sway of the train, the hush of the wind as it brushed against the carriages, the endless, steady rhythm of the wheels on the rails. Each sound was a thread, weaving together into a fabric of calm. She thought of Vermont, the destination waiting in the mountains. But the thought did not carry urgency. She felt no need to arrive quickly. The journey itself was enough. Each mile carried her not only closer to a place, but deeper into herself, into a quiet she had been longing for without even realizing it. As the train curved around another bend, the moon appeared large, luminous silver. It bathed the countryside in a soft glow, touching the fields, the barns, the sleeping houses nestled in valleys. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn felt as though the entire world had slowed to match the rhythm of the train. Nothing hurried, nothing demanded, only the quiet passage of time, measured in stars and rails. She leaned back into her seat, her body sinking further into rest. Her hands grew still on her lap, her breathing deepened, her thoughts softened like pages closing in a book. The night wrapped itself around her, gentle and infinite, carrying her forward. The train whispered onward, through forests and fields, valleys and rivers, its golden windows glowing softly in the dark. It was not just a machine moving across the land. It was a cradle, carrying its passengers through the velvet night, rocking them gently toward dreams. And as Evelyn drifted, she realized this was the gift of the train to Vermont. Not merely arrival, but the journey itself. A slow, steady passage into peace. The train continued its unhurried journey into the quiet of night, and with each mile, the world outside softened into stillness. The wheels turned steadily over the rails. Click, clack, click, clack. Not too fast, never too loud, just enough to create a rhythm that cradled every soul on board. It was a sound like breathing, like the gentle inhale and exhale of the earth itself. And soon, Evelyn felt her body moving with that rhythm, her breath falling into step with the train's slow song. The station, the town, the noise of the day, all of it had been left behind. What remained was this endless ribbon of track, guiding them forward into the soft embrace of darkness. Outside her window, the countryside unfolded like a dream. The last blush of sunset had faded completely now, leaving the sky painted in shades of deep indigo and velvet blue. A few clouds lingered, wisps stretched across the heavens, their edges silvered by the rising moon. Stars pierced the sky one by one, as though someone had lit lanterns across an infinite canvas. They shimmered faintly, gently, patiently. Some sparkled with sharp brilliance, while others glowed with a hazy warmth, their light softened by distance. Evelyn watched them as the train curved north, the stars shifting and sliding across the glass like companions who walked alongside her. From time to time, the train passed through clusters of forest. Tall pines and maples reached upward, their branches tangled together to form dark, arching corridors. The trees seemed to stand as guardians, watching over the train as it slipped between them. Their trunks cast long shadows that swayed like whispers in the moonlight. When the branches parted, clearings appeared, small farms, lone barns, fields resting under blankets of frost or dew. Smoke curled gently from the chimneys of distant cottages, faint traces of lives winding down for the night. The windows glowed golden, just like the train's lamps, each one a beacon of warmth in the cool, quiet landscape. Evelyn wondered, for the briefest moment, what stories belonged to those houses. Who had tucked themselves in for the night, what laughter had faded, what quiet had settled into their rooms. Then the train carried her forward, the mystery dissolving back into the night. Her gaze shifted to the reflection of the carriage interior mirrored faintly on the glass. Behind her, passengers had grown quieter, as if sleep itself had climbed aboard and taken a seat among them. The old man with the cane had drawn his coat closer and tipped his wool hat low across his brow. The young woman with flowers rested her chin on her chest, the bouquet now lying gently on the seat beside her, petals catching the lamplight. The couple with the thermos sat shoulder to shoulder, hands loosely linked, their breathing in sync, as if they too had given themselves over to the rhythm of the rails. The carriage was warm, the air faintly scented with polished wood and the slightest trace of tea leaves. Golden lamps glowed at even intervals, not bright enough to disturb, only soft enough to soothe. The light pooled across velvet seats, across carpeted aisles, and across the travelers themselves, draping them in a kind of gentle hush. The conductor moved silently through the carriage, his lantern held low, the flame dimmed. He did not rush. He walked with the ease of someone who knew there was no hurry. He checked each row with care, his presence reassuring, like a quiet guardian of the night. When his eyes met Evelyn's, he gave a small, knowing nod. There was kindness in the gesture, as if he too understood that this journey was not merely about reaching Vermont, but about being carried safely through the dark. Evelyn leaned back into her seat, the cushion embracing her, the window cool against her cheek. She let her eyes close for a moment and simply listened. The hum of the engine, low and steady. The whisper of the wind rushing past the carriage walls. The constant lullaby of wheels against steel. Click, clack, click, clack. It was all so steady, so predictable, so safe. Each sound wove itself into the next until she could no longer separate them, only feel them surrounding her, wrapping her in a cocoon of motion and quiet. As the train rounded a curve, the landscape opened, and she caught her breath at what she saw, a wide lake, smooth as glass, stretching out beneath the silver gaze of the moon. It reflected the sky so clearly that for a moment it was as if the train had lifted into the heavens themselves, gliding not across Earth, but across starlight. The constellations shimmered on the water's surface, twin heavens above and below. Evelyn felt her chest swell softly, not with excitement, but with a deep, unspoken peace. Her thoughts drifted then toward Vermont, toward what might be waiting there. She pictured rolling hills, villages nestled in valleys, winding roads lined with maples glowing in the pale light of dawn. She imagined small cafes, wooden porches, and quiet bookstores filled with the scent of paper and pine. She didn't know exactly what awaited her, but the details didn't matter. What mattered was the promise of slowness, of calm. And with that thought, she sank deeper into rest. The moonlight bathed the fields, the barns, the forests, each one sliding past as though part of a lullaby written by the land itself. And all the while, the train continued on, steady and unhurried, carrying Evelyn and her fellow passengers deeper into the heart of night, deeper into the embrace of peace. The world outside moved, yet Evelyn felt still. The train rocked her gently. The stars watched quietly. The night whispered on. And she let herself drift, carried forward, carried softly, on the train to Vermont.
The train pressed on through the night,
its steady heartbeat carrying everyone deeper into the folds of quiet. Click-clack, click-clack. It was a sound that blurred the edges of thought, a sound that softened the line between waking and dreaming. Evelyn sat with her head leaned against the glass. For a time she let her eyes close, drifting in the half-world where images passed like drifting clouds. She saw flashes of rivers, the glow of stars, the warmth of lantern light. And yet, something within her urged her to look once more at the people who shared this carriage, companions in this gentle passage through the night. She lifted her gaze slowly, quietly. The old man across the aisle stirred, pulling his coat tighter. His hat tipped back slightly, revealing a face lined not only by age but by kindness. His hands rested on his cane, large, weathered hands that told of years of work. Evelyn thought of him not as a stranger, but as someone whose life had been filled with small, steady acts that mattered. He had the air of someone traveling home, perhaps to a porch light that still burned for him, no matter how late the hour. A few seats ahead, the young woman with the flowers shifted in her sleep. The bouquet, wrapped in simple paper, slid gently toward the edge of the seat. Evelyn reached forward softly, steadying it before it could fall. She adjusted it so the stems lay safe once more across the woman's lap. The flowers, white daisies, pale roses, and sprigs of lavender, gave off a faint fragrance, a reminder of gardens of spring, of places where time was measured not by clocks but by the blooming of petals. Evelyn wondered if the flowers were meant for someone waiting at the journey's end, or perhaps for a grave, a memory honored. But the thought held no sorrow, only tenderness. The couple at the far end of the carriage murmured softly to one another. Their voices were low, as though they were speaking inside a dream. Evelyn could not make out their words, but she heard the warmth in them, the gentle rise and fall of shared affection. At one point, the woman rested her head on the man's shoulder, and he adjusted his coat to cover them both. They sat that way for a long while, two figures curled into the comfort of each other, as if the train itself had tucked them in. Evelyn noticed how in this carriage, silence did not feel empty. It was full of presence, of shared humanity, of lives brushing gently against one another in the quiet of night. No one demanded stories, yet each person carried one within them, like a lantern glowing softly behind glass. The conductor passed again, slower this time, almost weightless in his steps. He paused near the old man, adjusting the lantern above him to cast a little more light, then moved on without a word. His gestures were small, but they felt like care stitched into the fabric of the journey. When he came near Evelyn, he tipped his cap once more. She smiled faintly and he moved on, leaving behind a sense of reassurance, as if the train itself were alive, watching over them. The world outside had grown quieter still. Forests passed like shadows, rivers flashed silver under moonlight, and the stars kept watch overhead. Evelyn wondered briefly if those stars had watched countless travelers before her, people who had pressed their foreheads to glass and let themselves be carried into sleep by the same gentle rhythm. Her body grew heavier, her thoughts slower. The small encounters, the flowers, the couple's soft whispers, the old man's steady presence, drifted together into a kind of tapestry, a reminder that even in silence, we are never truly alone, that peace can be shared wordlessly, simply by being near others who move through the night with us. She exhaled softly, her eyelids lowering once more. The train rocked her gently. The voices, the footsteps, the rustle of flowers all grew faint. And soon, Evelyn felt herself slipping deeper, the night wrapping her in its arms. The train to Vermont carried on, patient and unhurried, each mile a step closer not only to the mountains, but to the soft frontier of dreams. The night deepened, yet the train carried its warmth like a moving lantern through the darkness. The steady rhythm of the rails pressed on. Click, clack, click, clack. A sound that was not only heard but felt beneath the feet, through the seat, within the chest. Evelyn sat very still, listening, half asleep yet awake enough to notice the gentle life around her. There was a magic to this hour, when conversation had faded, when the hush of the world seemed to invite the mind to wander with quiet curiosity. Her eyes fell first upon the old man across the aisle. His posture had shifted since earlier, his shoulders slightly hunched forward, his cane resting now against the seat beside him. The brim of his hat had tilted back just enough to reveal the lines of his face. They were not sharp, not severe, but softened by time, like folds in worn leather that had endured both storms and sunlight. There was a gentleness in his expression, even as he slept. Evelyn wondered what he dreamed of. Perhaps of younger days, fields of grass, or the scent of bread from a kitchen he had once known. Perhaps of faces he had not seen in years, faces that lived on in memory more vividly than in the present. His steady breathing matched the rhythm of the train, as if he and the carriage were joined in the same lullaby. A few seats away, the young woman with the flowers stirred in her sleep. The bouquet slipped, the paper wrapping crackling faintly in the stillness. Evelyn leaned forward, her movements small, careful, and eased the flowers back into place. She caught the fragrance of lavender and roses, a soft, soothing scent that drifted between the seats. It was a scent of comfort, of gardens tended with patience, of hands arranging blossoms with care. Evelyn imagined the flower's destination. A gift? A reunion? Perhaps a tribute for someone gone but never forgotten. Whatever the reason, they carried meaning, and even in their stillness, they seemed alive, a bridge between the waking world and memory. The couple at the far end of the carriage had grown quieter still. Their whispers had faded into silence, but their closeness spoke louder than words. The woman leaned into her companion, her head resting against his shoulder, her hair falling like a dark curtain across her cheek. The man held her hand loosely, his thumb brushing once, twice, against her knuckles before his own breathing slowed into slumber. There was something timeless about them. Not their faces, not their clothing, but the way they sat together. Two people carrying one another through the journey of life, content to let the world pass slowly, side by side. Evelyn smiled faintly, her heart warmed by these quiet observations. She thought of how trains often gathered people not by choice, but by coincidence, strangers stepping into a shared vessel, carried together for a time. And yet, in this small carriage, under the spell of night, coincidence felt like something more. It felt like community, a reminder that no one truly traveled alone. The conductor returned, his lantern lowered to a dim glow. He paused near the old man, straightened the cane that leaned precariously against the seat, and adjusted the man's coat so it covered his chest more fully. He did these things silently, without expectation of thanks, as though tending to the small comforts of others was his truest work. When he reached Evelyn's row, their eyes met again. His nod was softer this time, almost like a blessing, a wordless assurance that she could rest without worry, that the night and its train were steady guardians. She returned his smile gently, and he moved on, disappearing into the next carriage, the faint glow of his lantern bobbing like a firefly until it was gone. Outside, the world continued its quiet performance. Forests unfurled like waves of shadow, then gave way to open fields touched by moonlight. In one stretch, the land dipped into a valley where a river gleamed like a silver ribbon, winding endlessly. In another, hills rose high, their slopes painted with pines that whispered together as the wind moved through them. Evelyn's reflection hovered faintly in the glass, layered with stars and passing trees. She studied it for a moment, not out of vanity but curiosity. She saw herself softened by lamplight, eyes heavy but calm, lips turned in the faintest smile. She did not look hurried or anxious or weighed down. She looked as though she belonged in this moment, as though the night itself had invited her to pause and breathe. Her thoughts drifted toward Vermont, toward whatever awaited her there. Yet she felt no urgency to arrive. The journey itself felt like the destination, each passing mile not something to be endured, but something to be cherished. The slowing of time, the stillness of others, the rocking motion of the train, all of it felt like an answer to a question she hadn't realized she had been asking. The old man sighed softly in his sleep. The young woman's flowers stirred as the train rocked gently. The couple leaned into one another, a picture of quiet devotion. And Evelyn, surrounded by these fragments of humanity, felt her own heart ease. She was not alone. None of them were. Even in silence, even in slumber, they were together, journeying under the same stars, carried through the same night. Her eyelids lowered once more. Her breathing deepened. She let herself be cradled by the rhythm of the rails, her mind drifting gently toward dreams. The train to Vermont pressed on, its golden lamps glowing warmly against the deep, endless night. The train moved deeper into the night, and midnight approached like a quiet guest. Not loud, not sudden, but soft and inevitable, slipping gently into the carriage the way moonlight enters through an open window. The world outside had grown darker still, as if the night itself had deepened its breath. Forests pressed closer, their branches arching above the tracks like cathedral vaults, tall and solemn. The moon now hung higher, silver and round, draping the land in a pale glow that blurred the edges of hills and rivers. Everything seemed softer, dreamlike, as though the earth itself were falling asleep. Inside the carriage, stillness reigned. The lamps glowed dimmer now, their golden light fading into amber halos. Passengers had surrendered fully to rest. The old man leaned back, his cane cradled in one arm, his breathing slow and deep. The young woman with her flowers now slept peacefully, her lips curved in the faintest smile, as if the bouquet in her lap had carried her into a gentle dream. The couple at the end of the row had become so still they might have been carved into the seats themselves, their hands entwined loosely, their shoulders touching with quiet certainty. Evelyn watched them only for a moment before her own eyes grew heavy again. The rhythm of the train was a lullaby she could not resist. Click, clack, click, clack, the endless steady heartbeat of the rails. She leaned into the window, her cheek cool against the glass. Outside, stars wheeled slowly above the dark mountains. They seemed brighter now, as though midnight had lifted a veil. Constellations stretched across the heavens like patterns woven into a great quilt, infinite and serene. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn felt as though the train was not moving across the earth at all, but sailing through the sky itself, gliding between constellations. A soft gust of wind brushed the carriage, rattling faintly against the glass. It carried with it the scent of pine and distant rivers. The night was alive, but not in a restless way. It was alive in the way of whispers, of unseen creatures padding softly through the woods, of streams murmuring to themselves under the stars. The conductor passed once more. His lantern now dimmed almost to darkness, casting only the faintest glow at his feet. He did not stop, did not adjust coats or check tickets. At midnight, his duty was not to guide but to guard. His steady presence was reassurance enough. When Evelyn glimpsed him, she thought of him less as a man and more as a spirit of the train itself. Its watcher, its shepherd through the hours when the world belonged to sleep. Her thoughts drifted then, as thoughts often do when sleep lingers near. She imagined the train as a cradle, rocking not only her but every soul aboard. She imagined it as a great vessel crossing a midnight sea, its lamps like small stars guiding them across calm waters. She imagined Vermont waiting, but Vermont felt far away, a dream for the morning. The night, the journey itself, was enough. The wheels hummed softly beneath her, a sound that had become so constant it no longer felt like sound at all, but like the natural rhythm of her own heart. Click clack, the lullaby of the rails, the gentle rocking of the night. Her body grew heavier, her mind lighter. Images began to blur at the edges. Forests, stars, rivers, all dissolving into the warm haze that comes before dreams. She did not fight it. She welcomed it, as one welcomes the tide, knowing it carries you where you are meant to go. And so, as the clock passed midnight, Evelyn surrendered fully to the journey. The train to Vermont continued on, its windows glowing softly against the vast dark. A quiet ship sailing through the ocean of night. Midnight arrived not as a sudden toll of the clock, but as a slow unfurling, like the petals of a flower opening in the dark. The train seemed to sense it, adjusting its rhythm ever so slightly, settling into a deeper calm, as though honoring the hour. Outside, the night had grown impossibly vast. Forests stretched endlessly in both directions, their trees black silhouettes against a silvery horizon. Pines and oaks clustered so thickly together that they looked like a single living wall, their branches tangled, their tops whispering in the wind. The moon, high and round, cast a sheen upon the river that wound beside the tracks, a thin ribbon of light, weaving through the shadows like a thread of silver in a quilt of darkness. The stars multiplied above, scattered across the heavens with dazzling clarity. Constellations Evelyn had never learned seemed suddenly familiar, as if some quiet part of her had always known their shapes. The Big Dipper hung like a ladle scooping eternity. Orion's belt glimmered with steady precision. Beyond them, faint stars pulsed gently, like lanterns hung by unseen hands. For a moment, Evelyn wondered whether the train was still bound by tracks at all, or if it had lifted from the earth, gliding weightlessly through the cosmos. The inside of the carriage mirrored the night's hush. Passengers had surrendered fully to their dreams. The young woman with the bouquet clutched her flowers against her chest as though guarding them in sleep, her face serene, almost angelic. The old man, cane resting at his side, wore a look of peace so deep it seemed carved into his features, the burden of years momentarily lifted. The young couple leaned into each other unconsciously, their breath sinking into a single rhythm, their closeness a quiet proof of love. Even the air felt different, cooler, softer, touched with the faint scent of pine that slipped in through unseen cracks. It mingled with the warm undertone of polished wood and the faint metallic tang of the rails. The atmosphere was one of balance, inside warmth, outside coolness, perfectly aligned to lull the heart. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the glass. The vibration of the train pulsed faintly through her skin, a rhythm steady enough to match her breathing. Click-clack, click-clack. The sound no longer felt external. It merged with her heartbeat, with the rise and fall of her chest. It was no longer the train moving her forward, but the very rhythm of life itself, carrying her onward with patience and care. As the wheels hummed, she began to imagine. In her drifting thoughts, the train was no longer made of wood and steel. It was a vessel of dreams, a cradle swaying across invisible tides. Its lamps were not lamps but stars, guiding it across a great ocean of night. Each passenger was not merely asleep. They were dreamers sailing together, each one tucked safely into their own gentle world. The conductor passed by again, softer this time, like a shadow in motion. His lantern was dimmed almost to nothing, a low glow barely brushing the aisle. He did not speak, did not pause. He only walked the length of the carriage as though ensuring that all souls aboard were safe. When Evelyn caught a glimpse of his face, it was not the stern lines of duty she saw, but the calm patience of a guardian. It struck her then. He was not simply guiding them to Vermont. He was guiding them through the night itself. The train rocked slightly, the way a boat might when crossing a gentle current. Evelyn's eyelids fluttered heavier with every sway. The world outside blurred, stars smearing into streaks of light as her vision softened. Her thoughts grew looser. She pictured Vermont not as a place of maps and stations, but as a promise of dawn, of warmth, of arrival after the long embrace of night. She pictured its fields bathed in gold, its rivers alive with morning birdsong. But that was tomorrow. For now she belonged to midnight. The trees thin just enough for the train to pass through an open valley, and there, under the limitless stars, Evelyn felt a moment of weightlessness. She could almost believe the train was no longer bound to the earth at all. It glided, it drifted, it sailed. Click-clack, click-clack. The rails sang their lullaby. The windows shimmered with reflections of starlight. The night cradled every soul aboard. And Evelyn, eyes drifting closed, breathed in the deep, cool air of midnight. Her body grew heavier, her mind lighter. And slowly, as the train carried her deeper into the crossing, she drifted into dreams. The rhythm of the train softened as the night began to loosen its hold. Evelyn stirred faintly, not yet awake but not fully asleep either. It was that quiet space between dreams and morning, where everything feels lighter, hushed, and strangely tender. Through the windows, the world was changing. The deep velvet of night had begun to pale, washed with the faintest brushstrokes of gray and silver. On the far horizon, a faint line of gold pressed upward, as though the sun itself were stretching gently awake, careful not to disturb the peace. The forest, once shadowed and endless, now revealed its edges. The graceful lines of tall pines, the soft curve of hills, the slow winding river that glimmered with the first hints of dawn. The train seemed to know. Its motion grew gentler, no longer pushing forward with urgency, but gliding as though savoring the last steps of the journey. The wheels whispered instead of clattered, their song mellowing into a softer lull. Inside the carriage, passengers began to shift in their sleep. The young woman's flowers loosened in her hands, their petals catching the early glow. The old man sighed, a sound of comfort, as if the night had healed something within him. The young couple stirred, their hands finding each other even before their eyes opened. It was not yet morning for them, not truly, but the quiet hum of arrival was already there. Evelyn's eyes opened slowly. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming, because the view outside seemed painted rather than real. A valley stretched wide before her, fields blanketed with soft mist that curled and rose like breath on a winter morning. The mist caught the newborn light, turning it into threads of gold and pearl. Beyond the fields, the mountains stood still and timeless, their peaks catching the blush of dawn. The station was near. She could feel it in the way the train eased itself forward, unhurried yet certain. A faint bell in the distance echoed through the valley, slow and measured, calling them home. The conductor passed one final time, his lantern now extinguished. He nodded quietly to Evelyn, not with words but with a kindness that seemed to say, "You've made it through the night." The train slowed, its voice fading into soft sighs. The brakes whispered. The wheels sang their last notes upon the rails. At last, with one final gentle shudder, the journey came to rest. Evelyn stayed still for a long moment, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The air of Vermont drifted in cool, sweet, touched with pine and dew. She inhaled deeply, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a fullness in her chest, a quiet that belonged not only to the world around her but to herself. Passengers rose slowly, carrying with them the softness of the night, the comfort of shared silence, the healing of rest. One by one they stepped out into the dawn. Evelyn followed, her feet light, her heart steady. The platform stretched ahead, bathed in morning light, a place both new and familiar. Behind her, the train rested like a tired guardian, its task complete. Ahead, the day waited with promise. And in between, in that quiet breath of transition, Evelyn whispered a thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to the night, to the journey, to the dreamlike passage that had carried her here. The sun lifted higher, scattering the mist, opening the valley to its full brilliance. The world was awake, and Evelyn, calm and unburdened, was ready to step into it. And so, dear dreamer, our story finds its gentle close, but your night continues calm and unbroken. Let your thoughts drift, as lightly as clouds across a moonlit sky. Let your body sink, as deeply as roots into the quiet earth. There is no need to hold on, no need to listen further, only to rest, for the story remains with you, carrying you through the night, until morning's light comes softly to call. Good night, and sweet dreams. From the Midnight Library. Crescent moon sparkles, break time equals 2000